The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Buckingham Palace as Camilla hurried through the corridors, her heart pounding with each step. She clutched a small leather suitcase tightly in her trembling hands, glancing nervously over her shoulder every few seconds. The palace felt different today, cold and unwelcoming, as if the very walls were watching her every move. For weeks, Camilla had been planning this moment. The constant pressure, the endless scrutiny, and the weight of royal expectations had become unbearable. She had tried to discuss her feelings with Charles, but he seemed distant, consumed by his duties and responsibilities. The media attention had intensified recently, with photographers camping outside the palace gates and reporters dissecting her every public appearance. Last night had been the final breaking point. A particularly harsh article in the morning papers had criticized her charity work, questioning her motives and suggesting she was only playing a role for public approval. The words had cut deep, especially since her charitable efforts were genuine and close to her heart. She had spent years working with various organizations, particularly those supporting literacy and domestic violence victims, but the press seemed determined to paint her in a negative light. As she made her way toward the servants' entrance, Camilla reflected on how different her life had become since marrying into the royal family. The woman who had once enjoyed simple pleasures like gardening and reading in peace now lived under constant observation. Every outfit choice was analyzed, every public statement was scrutinized, and every private moment felt invaded by the ever-present threat of paparazzi cameras. The suitcase contained only the essentials: a few changes of clothes, some personal photographs, her grandmother's jewelry, and the handwritten letters from her children from her first marriage. These items represented the life she wanted to return to, a life where she could be herself without the burden of royal protocol and public judgment. She had considered leaving a note for Charles, but what could she possibly say? That the fairy tale had become a nightmare? That she felt trapped in a golden cage? That she missed being able to walk down the street without security guards and photographers following her every step? Instead, she had simply kissed his forehead as he slept, whispering a silent goodbye to the man she loved but could no longer live this life with. The palace corridors seemed endless as she navigated through the maze of rooms and hallways. Her footsteps echoed softly on the polished floors, and she winced at every sound, fearful that someone might discover her escape attempt. The staff would be arriving soon for their morning duties, and she needed to be gone before the palace came alive with its daily activities. Camilla paused at a window overlooking the palace gardens, remembering happier times when she and Charles had walked among the roses, discussing their hopes and dreams for their future together. Those moments felt like they belonged to someone else now, a different version of herself who had believed she could adapt to this extraordinary life. The weight of her decision pressed heavily on her chest. She knew that leaving would cause a scandal, that the media would have a field day with the story of a royal wife abandoning her duties. But she also knew that staying would slowly destroy the person she had always been. The constant criticism had begun to affect her sleep, her appetite, and her ability to find joy in the simple things that had once brought her happiness. As she approached the final corridor leading to her planned exit, Camilla took a deep breath and steeled herself for what lay ahead. She had no clear plan beyond getting away from the palace, perhaps returning to her former home where she could think clearly about her future. The morning air would soon embrace her face as a free woman, or so she hoped. Her steps quickened as she saw the door ahead, the barrier between her current life and the uncertain but promising freedom that awaited beyond the palace walls. The early morning light filtering through the windows seemed to beckon her forward, offering hope for a new beginning away from the suffocating expectations of royal life. Just as Camilla reached for the door handle, a firm voice echoed behind her in the corridor. "Your Royal Highness, please stop where you are." Her blood turned to ice as she recognized the authoritative tone of James Morrison, the head of palace security. She had hoped to slip away unnoticed, but somehow her carefully planned escape had been discovered. Slowly, she turned around to face the tall, stern-looking man who had served the royal family faithfully for over 15 years. James stood at attention, his crisp uniform immaculate as always, but his expression showed a mixture of duty and genuine concern. He had watched Camilla struggle with the pressures of royal life over the past months, noticing the subtle changes in her demeanor during public appearances and private moments within the palace walls. "I cannot allow you to leave the premises without proper security protocols in place," James continued, his voice measured but gentle. "The Queen Consort's safety is my responsibility, and I'm afraid I must ask you to return to your chambers." Camilla's shoulders sagged as the reality of her situation sank in. Even in her moment of desperate escape, she remained bound by the invisible chains of royal protocol and security concerns. The suitcase felt heavier in her hands, weighted down not just by her personal belongings but by the crushing realization that freedom might be more elusive than she had imagined. "James, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the vast corridor. "I just need some time away from all of this. I can't breathe anymore. Every day feels like I'm performing a role that doesn't fit who I really am." The security chief's expression softened slightly, revealing the compassionate man beneath the professional exterior. He had seen many members of the royal family struggle with the unique pressures of their positions, but Camilla's pain seemed particularly acute. Her genuine nature had always set her apart from others who seemed to thrive in the spotlight. "I understand your feelings, Your Royal Highness," James replied carefully, "but disappearing without notice would create chaos. The media would assume the worst, the palace staff would panic, and His Majesty would be devastated when he discovers you've gone." Camilla closed her eyes, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill over. She thought about Charles waking up to find her gone, the confusion and hurt he would feel. Despite their recent distance, she still loved him deeply, but she felt like she was drowning in the expectations that came with being his wife. "What if I promise to return?" she asked desperately. "What if I just need a few days to clear my head, to remember who I am beneath all these titles and obligations?" James considered her request carefully. In all his years of service, he had never encountered a situation quite like this. The protocols were clear about unauthorized departures, but he also recognized the human being standing before him, clearly in distress and seeking relief from pressures that most people could never comprehend. "The proper channels exist for royal family members who need time away," he explained patiently. "There are private residences, secure locations where you could have the space you need while maintaining appropriate safety measures." But Camilla shook her head, frustrated by the suggestion. Even in retreat, she would still be surrounded by the machinery of royal life, still followed by security details and monitored by staff. What she craved was anonymity, the ability to walk into a coffee shop without causing a stir or to sit in a park without photographers appearing from behind trees. "You don't understand," she said, her voice growing stronger with emotion. "I want to be invisible again. I want to grocery shop and visit friends without it becoming a news story. I want to make mistakes without them appearing on the front page of every newspaper in the country." James studied her face, seeing the exhaustion and desperation etched in her features. He had witnessed firsthand how the relentless media attention had affected her, how she had gradually withdrawn from many of the activities she once enjoyed. The woman who had once laughed easily and spoke candidly with staff members had become more guarded and careful with her words. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed from another corridor, indicating that the palace was beginning to stir with the start of another day. James knew that their conversation would soon be interrupted, and whatever decision needed to be made would have to happen quickly. "Your Royal Highness," he said quietly, "I'm going to need you to come with me, but I promise you that we can discuss your concerns with the appropriate people who might be able to help you find a solution that works within the necessary constraints." Camilla looked toward the door one final time, feeling the pull of the freedom that lay just beyond her reach, then back at James, whose duty-bound position made him an unlikely ally in her moment of crisis. James extended his hand toward Camilla's suitcase, his expression remaining professional despite the unusual circumstances. "I'm afraid I'll need to examine the contents of your luggage, Your Royal Highness. Standard security protocol requires inspection of any items being transported from the palace premises." The request hit Camilla like a physical blow. The suitcase contained her most personal possessions, items that represented her identity beyond her royal title. The thought of having these intimate belongings scrutinized felt like the final invasion of her privacy, the last boundary being crossed in a life where boundaries had become increasingly meaningless. "Please, James," she pleaded, clutching the suitcase closer to her chest. "These are just personal items, things that belong to me from before I married Charles. There's nothing dangerous or valuable in royal terms, just memories and keepsakes that matter to me personally." But James remained firm, though his tone carried genuine regret. I understand this is difficult, but I cannot make exceptions to security protocols, regardless of my personal feelings about the situation. The safety and security of the royal family and palace property must take precedence. With trembling hands, Camilla set the suitcase down on a nearby antique table and stepped back. James approached carefully, treating both the luggage and its owner with as much dignity as the situation allowed. As he opened the clasps, Camilla felt as though her soul was being laid bare for inspection. The first items James removed were several framed photographs. One showed Camilla with her children from her first marriage during a family holiday at the seaside, their faces bright with genuine laughter and joy. Another captured her late grandmother in her garden, surrounded by the roses that had inspired Camilla's own love of gardening. A third photograph showed her former home, a modest country house where she had spent some of the happiest years of her life. James handled each photograph with care, examining them briefly before setting them aside. He could see the pain in Camilla's eyes as she watched him handle these precious memories, and he felt the weight of his duty pressing heavily on his conscience. Next came a small jewelry box containing pieces that clearly held sentimental rather than monetary value. A simple gold locket that had belonged to her mother, a pair of pearl earrings given to her by her first husband, and a charm bracelet that told the story of her children's milestones through small silver tokens. These weren't the grand royal jewels that adorned her during state functions, but humble pieces that connected her to the woman she had been before titles and protocol consumed her life. These pieces aren't listed in the official royal jewelry inventory, James noted, more for protocol than suspicion. They appear to be personal items predating your marriage to His Majesty. They are, Camilla confirmed quietly. They're all I have left of my life before all this began. I just wanted to keep them with me, to remember who I used to be. James continued his examination, finding several letters tied together with a faded ribbon. The handwriting on the envelopes belonged to her children, and he could see that some of the letters dated back many years. He didn't read the contents, but he could imagine they contained the kinds of personal communications between mother and children that had sustained her through difficult times. At the bottom of the suitcase lay a few changes of clothing, simple dresses and comfortable shoes that stood in stark contrast to the elaborate gowns and formal wear that filled her royal wardrobe. These clothes represented the simplicity she yearned for, the ability to dress for comfort rather than cameras, to choose clothing based on personal preference rather than diplomatic significance. A small book caught James's attention, its pages worn from repeated reading. It was a collection of poetry that Camilla had owned since her university days, filled with handwritten notes in the margins and pressed flowers between certain pages. The book had clearly been a constant companion through various chapters of her life, a source of comfort and inspiration during both happy and difficult times. "This is everything?" James asked, though he had already conducted a thorough search. Camilla nodded, watching as he began to carefully replace her belongings in the suitcase. Each item that disappeared back into the luggage felt like another piece of her independence being taken away, another symbol of her failed escape attempt. "Your Royal Highness," James said as he closed the suitcase, "I need to retain this luggage pending further discussion with senior palace staff. The items will be kept secure and returned to you, but I cannot allow you to leave with them at this time." The confiscation of her suitcase felt like the final door slamming shut on her dreams of freedom. Without even these small tokens of her former life, she felt completely severed from the woman she had once been, trapped entirely within the role that had been imposed upon her. As James lifted the suitcase, Camilla realized that her escape attempt had not only failed, but had also resulted in the loss of the very items that had given her strength to attempt it in the first place. The walk back through the palace corridors felt like a funeral march to Camilla. Each step took her further away from the freedom she had desperately sought, and deeper into the golden prison that her life had become. James walked beside her, maintaining a respectful distance while ensuring she couldn't make another attempt to leave. As they passed through the grand hallways adorned with centuries of royal portraits, Camilla felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. These walls had witnessed countless dramas, scandals, and personal struggles of royal family members throughout the ages. She wondered how many others had walked these same corridors feeling trapped and desperate for escape. The early morning, Light streaming through the tall, windows-illuminated dust particles dancing in the air, and Camilla found herself fixated on their random movement, envying their freedom to float wherever the breeze carried them. Such a simple thing, yet something she felt incapable of achieving in her own life. "Your Royal Highness," James said quietly as they walked, "I hope you understand that my actions today come from a place of duty, not personal judgment. I've watched you struggle these past months, and I want you to know that your feelings are not unnoticed by those of us who serve the palace." His words carried an unexpected kindness that caught Camilla off guard. She had become so accustomed to viewing the palace staff as extensions of the system that confined her that she had forgotten they were individuals with their own observations and feelings about the situations they witnessed. "Thank you, James," she replied softly. "I know you're just doing your job. I don't blame you for any of this. I suppose I blame myself for believing I could simply walk away from responsibilities that don't have easy solutions." They paused at a junction in the corridor where two hallways met, and James seemed to consider something carefully before speaking again. "If I may speak candidly, Your Royal Highness, running away rarely solves the problems we're trying to escape. Sometimes it just creates new ones while leaving the original issues unresolved." Camilla looked at him with surprise, not expecting such personal insight from someone she had always seen as strictly professional. "And what would you suggest instead? How does someone change a life that feels completely beyond their control?" James glanced around to ensure they were alone before answering. "In my experience, change often comes from within the system rather than from abandoning it entirely. Perhaps there are ways to modify your role, to find compromise between your personal needs and your public duties." His suggestion sparked something in Camilla's mind, a possibility she hadn't fully considered. Instead of viewing her situation as an all-or-nothing choice between complete freedom and total captivity, perhaps there were middle grounds she hadn't explored. Maybe she could find ways to maintain her authentic self while fulfilling her obligations. "You mean finding ways to be myself within the role rather than trying to become someone entirely different?" she asked, a glimmer of hope creeping into her voice. "Exactly," James confirmed. "The royal family has evolved throughout history. Each member has brought their own personality and interest to their position. Perhaps instead of fighting against your role, you could reshape it to better accommodate who you are." As they continued walking, Camilla began to think about the aspects of royal life that she actually enjoyed. Her charity work, particularly with literacy programs, brought her genuine satisfaction. The opportunity to bring attention to important causes was something she had always valued, even when the media attention felt overwhelming. She also realized that some of her happiest moments in recent months had come during informal interactions with palace staff and members of the public during official visits, when she could forget about the cameras and protocols and simply connect with people as one human being to another. She felt most like herself. "But what about the constant scrutiny?" she asked James. "How do I deal with feeling like every moment of my life is being judged and criticized?" James considered this carefully. Perhaps the key is focusing on the people and causes that matter rather than on those who criticize. Every public figure faces judgment, but those who find peace usually discover ways to filter out the noise and concentrate on the meaningful work they can accomplish. They had nearly reached Camilla's private chambers, and she could see her personal assistant approaching from the opposite direction, clearly having discovered her absence and now looking relieved to see her returning safely. The real world was intruding on this moment of unexpected clarity and connection with James. "What happens now?" Camilla asked, suddenly anxious about the consequences of her failed escape attempt. "Now we ensure that you have the support you need to find a sustainable way forward," James replied. "Your husband deserves to know about your struggles, and the palace staff who care about your well-being should be involved in finding solutions." As her assistant reached them, concern evident on her face, Camilla realized that her escape attempt, though unsuccessful, had opened a door to conversations that might not have happened otherwise. Perhaps sometimes the attempt to run away could lead to staying and fighting for change instead. Margaret, Camilla's personal assistant, rushed forward with evident relief and concern etched across her face. She had discovered the empty chambers during her routine morning check, and had spent the past hour coordinating a discreet search throughout the palace grounds. "Fearing the worst while hoping for the best, Your Royal Highness." "Thank goodness you're safe," Margaret breathed, her usual professional composure cracking slightly. "When I found your chambers empty this morning, I was terribly worried. Are you all right? Camilla felt a wave of guilt wash over her as she realized how her actions had affected others beyond herself. Margaret had been her assistant for 3 years, and their relationship had grown beyond professional boundaries into something resembling friendship. The older woman had often served as a buffer between Camilla and the more demanding aspects of royal protocol. "I'm sorry, Margaret," Camilla said sincerely. "I didn't think about how my absence would worry you and others. I was only thinking about my own need to get away from everything." James cleared his throat diplomatically. "Mrs. Patterson," he addressed Margaret formally, "Her Royal Highness experienced some distress this morning. I believe it would be beneficial for His Majesty to be informed about the situation, and perhaps for the palace physician to conduct a wellness check." Margaret's experienced eyes quickly assessed the situation, taking in Camilla's emotional state, James's protective stance, and the absence of the small suitcase she had noticed missing from the dressing room. As someone who had worked in royal households for over 2 decades, she understood that personal crises often manifested in various ways, and discretion was always paramount. "Of course," Margaret agreed smoothly. "Shall I arrange for breakfast to be served in the private sitting room? Perhaps His Majesty could join you there for a quiet morning meal where you can speak privately." The suggestion of involving Charles filled Camilla with both relief and anxiety. On one hand, she desperately wanted to share her feelings with her husband and seek his understanding. On the other hand, she feared that her escape attempt might damage their relationship further, or cause him to see her as unstable or unsuited for royal life. "Is Charles awake?" Camilla asked quietly, suddenly feeling exhausted by the emotional turmoil of the morning. "His Majesty is in his study reviewing the morning briefings," Margaret replied. "I'm certain he would want to be informed immediately about your well-being. He's been concerned about you lately, though he wasn't sure how to approach the subject without adding to any pressure you might be feeling." This revelation surprised Camilla. She had interpreted Charles's recent distance as indifference or preoccupation with his duties, not realizing that he had been observing her struggles and was unsure how to help. The gap between them had perhaps been created by mutual concern rather than lack of caring. James stepped forward slightly. "If I may suggest, Your Royal Highness, this situation presents an opportunity for important conversations that might lead to positive changes. Your feelings are valid, and addressing them directly could benefit not only your personal well-being but also your effectiveness in your royal role." Margaret nodded in agreement. "James is absolutely right. In my experience, the royal family members who thrive are those who find ways to align their personal values and interests with their public duties. It's not about suppressing who you are, but rather about finding authentic ways to serve." Camilla looked between these two people who had unexpectedly become her advocates in this moment of crisis. Their support felt genuine and without judgment, offering hope that she wasn't as alone in her struggles as she had believed. "What if Charles doesn't understand?" she asked, voicing her deepest fear. "What if he sees my wanting to leave as a betrayal of everything we've built together?" Margaret's expression softened with maternal warmth. "Your Royal Highness, His Majesty loves you deeply. He chose to marry you knowing that you weren't born into this life, and he's always valued your authenticity. I believe he would much rather know about your struggles than remain unaware while you suffer in silence." James added, "The king has always shown respect for honesty and directness. Your feelings about the pressures of royal life aren't unique, and he may have insights or solutions that could help address your concerns." The three of them stood in the hallway for a moment, each processing the weight of the morning's events and the conversations that would need to follow. Camilla felt as though she stood at a crossroads, with one path leading toward continued isolation and unhappiness, and another potentially leading toward understanding and positive change. "All right," Camilla said finally, drawing strength from the support of these two people who had shown her unexpected kindness during her darkest moment. "Let's arrange for me to speak with Charles. And Margaret, perhaps you could help me think through some of the specific issues that have been troubling me, so I can articulate them clearly." Margaret smiled with evident relief. "Of course, Your Royal Highness. Sometimes the first step toward solving problems is simply naming them clearly and sharing them with people who care about your well-being." As they began walking toward Camilla's chambers to prepare for the difficult but necessary conversation ahead, she felt the first genuine hope she had experienced in months. An hour later, Camilla sat across from Charles in their private sitting room. the morning sunlight filtering through the tall windows and casting warm patterns on the Persian carpet between them. She had changed from her escape outfit into a comfortable morning dress, and Margaret had arranged for tea and light breakfast items to be served. Though neither of them had touched the food, Charles's expression showed deep concern mixed with confusion as he studied his wife's face. Margaret had briefed him about the morning's events, but he struggled to understand how he had missed the depth of Camilla's distress. The woman sitting before him looked fragile and exhausted, so different from the confident partner who had stood beside him during their wedding ceremony. "Darling," Charles began gently, reaching across the small table to take her hand. "Margaret told me what happened this morning. I had no idea you were feeling so trapped and unhappy. Why didn't you come to me sooner?" Camilla's eyes filled with tears as she felt the warmth of his touch and heard the genuine concern in his voice. "I didn't know how to explain it without sounding ungrateful or weak. You were born into this life, Charles. It's natural to you in ways it may never be for me. I was afraid you'd think I was failing you or that I wasn't strong enough to be your wife." Charles moved his chair closer to hers, maintaining their connection. "You could never fail me by being honest about your feelings. I fell in love with you because of who you are, not because I wanted you to become someone else. If this life is changing you in ways that make you unhappy, then we need to find solutions together." The relief Camilla felt at his words was overwhelming. For months she had carried the burden of her unhappiness alone, believing that expressing it would disappoint the man she loved and potentially damage their marriage. Instead, she found him willing to listen and work toward solutions. "I miss being able to do simple things," she explained, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "I miss being able to meet a friend for coffee without it requiring security arrangements and media management. I miss being able to express an opinion without worrying about diplomatic implications. Sometimes I feel like I'm disappearing behind this royal persona." Charles nodded thoughtfully. "I understand more than you might think. There have been times throughout my life when I've felt constrained by the expectations and protocols of our position. The difference is that I've had decades to learn how to maintain my sense of self within these constraints. You've been thrown into the deep end without adequate preparation or support." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "Perhaps we've been approaching this incorrectly. Instead of expecting you to adapt completely to existing protocols, maybe we should be looking at how those protocols can be modified to accommodate your needs and strengths." This perspective shift intrigued Camilla. "What do you mean exactly?" "Well," Charles continued, "your background and experiences bring valuable perspectives to our work. Your genuine connection with people, your previous career, your personal interests. These aren't obstacles to overcome but assets to incorporate into your royal role." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where they had spent happier times together. The monarchy has always evolved with the times and the personalities of its members. My mother brought her own approach to the role, as did my grandmother before her. There's no reason why you shouldn't do the same. Camilla joined him at the window, feeling hopeful for the first time in months. "But what about the media criticism? The constant analysis of everything I do or say?" Charles turned to face her directly. "The media will always have opinions, but we can work with our communications team to better manage the narrative around your work and to highlight the causes and activities that matter most to you. We can also implement better boundaries around your private time and personal space." "I'd like that," Camilla said softly. "I want to contribute meaningfully to the causes I care about. But I also need to feel like I still exist as an individual person, not just as a royal role." Charles took both of her hands in his. "From now on, I want you to come to me whenever you're feeling overwhelmed or trapped. We're partners in this, and that means supporting each other through the challenges as well as celebrating the successes." "What about my suitcase?" Camilla asked, suddenly remembering her confiscated belongings. "James said he had to retain it for security reasons." Charles smiled for the first time that morning. "I'll speak with James about returning your personal items immediately. Those photographs and keepsakes are part of who you are, and you should never feel like you have to give up your personal history to fulfill your royal duties. And if I need time away occasionally, to visit friends or family or just to have some normalcy, then we'll arrange it properly," Charles assured her. "There are ways to maintain your security while giving you more freedom and privacy. We should have discussed these options months ago." As they embraced, Camilla felt the heavy weight of isolation and desperation finally beginning to lift from her shoulders. The morning's failed escape attempt had led to exactly what she had needed all along: honest communication, understanding, and a partner willing to work with her to find solutions rather than expecting her to simply endure an unsustainable situation. "Thank you for not giving up on me," she whispered against his shoulder. "Never," Charles replied firmly. "We'll figure this out together, one step at a time." 3 months later, Camilla stood in the gardens of a community center in a modest neighborhood outside London, surrounded by children participating in a literacy program she had helped establish. The autumn afternoon was crisp and bright, and she felt genuinely relaxed for the first time in over a year. No formal protocol dictated her interactions here. She was simply a woman who loved books, sharing that passion with young people who were discovering the joy of reading. The changes that had emerged from that difficult morning had been gradual but transformative. Charles had worked with the Palace communications team to restructure Camilla's public schedule, focusing on fewer, more meaningful engagements that aligned with her genuine interests and expertise. Instead of attending every social function and ceremonial event, she now concentrated her efforts on causes where she could make a real difference. James approached from where he had been maintaining a discreet security presence at the edge of the garden. In his hands was a familiar leather suitcase, the same one he had confiscated during her escape attempt. The sight of it brought back memories of that desperate morning, but now those memories carried lessons rather than pain. "Your Royal Highness," James said with a slight smile, "I believe these belong to you." Camilla accepted the suitcase with gratitude, though she no longer felt the desperate need for the items inside. The photographs and keepsakes had been returned to her chambers weeks ago, but James had kept the suitcase itself as a reminder of how close they had come to a very different outcome. "Thank you, James," she said warmly, "and thank you for stopping me that morning. I realize now that running away would have solved nothing and would have cost me everything that truly matters." "It was my pleasure to help, Your Royal Highness," James replied, "though I must say, watching you find your footing in your role has been far more rewarding than any security protocol I've ever followed." Margaret approached from the community center, where she had been coordinating the afternoon's activities with the local staff. Her role had evolved as well, becoming more of a collaborator in Camilla's charitable work, rather than just a manager of royal protocols. "The children want to show you their creative writing projects before we leave," Margaret announced. "They've been working on stories inspired by the books you brought during your last visit." Camilla's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. These interactions with the children had become the highlight of her royal duties, moments when she felt most authentic and useful. Their honest reactions and unguarded conversations reminded her of why she had wanted to support literacy programs in the first place. As they walked back toward the community center, Camilla reflected on how dramatically her perspective had changed. The royal life that had once felt like a prison now felt like a platform for meaningful work. The media attention that had once seemed invasive now served to draw attention to important causes. The protocols that had felt restrictive now provided structure that allowed her to accomplish more than she ever could have as a private citizen. "You know," she said to Margaret as they walked, "I've been thinking about expanding our literacy programs to include adult learners. There are so many people who never had the opportunity to develop strong reading skills, and they shouldn't be forgotten." Margaret made a note in her ever-present tablet. "That's an excellent idea. I'll research existing programs and see where we might be most effective in filling gaps in services." Inside the community center, a group of 8-year-olds had arranged their handwritten stories on a table, their faces glowing with pride as they prepared to share their work. Camilla settled into a child-sized chair, giving each young author her complete attention as they read their creative efforts aloud. One little girl had written a story about a queen who gave up her crown to become a teacher, while a boy had crafted an adventure tale about a prince who discovered that helping others was more exciting than royal ceremonies. Their innocent perspectives on leadership and service resonated deeply with Camilla's own journey toward finding meaning in her role. As the afternoon concluded and they prepared to return to the palace, Camilla felt a profound sense of contentment. The woman who had once tried to escape royal life in a desperate midnight flight now looked forward to returning home to discuss the day's experiences with Charles and to plan future projects that could make a real difference in people's lives. The leather suitcase sat beside her in the car, no longer a symbol of escape, but rather a reminder of how sometimes the things we try to run from can become the very things that give our lives purpose and meaning. Through honest communication, mutual support, and the gradual reshaping of her role to match her authentic self, Camilla had discovered that freedom wasn't about escaping responsibility, but about finding ways to fulfill it that honored both her duties and her identity. As the palace came into view, Camilla smiled, knowing that she was returning not as a prisoner to her golden cage, but as a woman who had found her place in an extraordinary life and was making it truly her own.